Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
Your thoughts on this address from the president about ISIS, the threats, and how they're evolving?
Well, let's begin by understanding the mood of the country. People are really scared and worried. You know, last night I ran into a couple that often travels abroad or to other parts of the country for New Year's Eve for the first time in over a decade. They're not traveling anywhere this year because they're so scared. Ran into someone else today who says they're avoiding stadiums and malls during the holiday season because they're scared. And people are scared not just because of these attacks, but because of a growing sense that we have a president that's completely overwhelmed by them. I mean, this is a president that called them the JV when they first emerged, ISIS did. Then just on the eve of the Paris attacks, basically argued that they were being contained, called the attacks in Paris a setback as opposed to a widespread terrorist attack that showed real progress on behalf of ISIS. After Paris, by the way, the only emotion the president ever showed on his overseas trips is when he was attacking the GOP on the debates we were having here about what to do with the Syrian refugee program. And nothing that happened in this speech tonight is going to assuage people's fears. First of all, we heard tonight that the same strategy that has brought us to this point is the strategy he is going to continue with. I mean, he honestly believes that there is a coalition fighting against ISIS. This is absurd. There is no such coalition. A lot of countries that have put their names onto a piece of paper, but the reality of it is we continue to conduct very limited air assaults, and you can't just defeat them from an air perspective, and we can talk about that more in this interview, I suppose. Yeah. But if you look beyond that tonight, he announced nothing new other than we need gun control, even though it would have done nothing to prevent the attack in California. We need to prevent people on the no-fly list from buying these weapons, even though there are people that work for DHS that are on the no-fly list. And by the way, these individuals that conducted this attack would not have been prevented from accessing their weapons. And then the cynicism tonight to spend a significant amount of time talking about discrimination against Muslims. Where is there widespread evidence that we have a problem in America with discrimination against Muslims? And the refusal to call this for what it is, a war on radical Islam. So I'm very disappointed tonight. I think not only did the president not to make things better tonight, I fear he may have made things worse in the minds of many Americans.
Senator, the president finished his address by saying that freedom is more powerful than fear. And specifically, what would a President Rubio do differently than what President Obama is doing and laid out tonight?
Well, first, we would be straightforward and honest with the American people. ISIS is a growing, significant, and very serious threat. They are not contained. They are growing ever more present in multiple places. They now have a very substantial presence, not just in Iraq and in Syria. They now have a very substantial presence in Libya, a growing presence in Afghanistan. They are actively plotting, and you'll see them over the next few months, attempt attacks in places like Kuwait and Bahrain and Jordan. They'll target American troops in places like Turkey. They are actively trying to use the refugee crisis to infiltrate fighters into Europe, into Canada, here into the homeland. They are a very real threat. We are at war with a radical jihadist group more capable than any terrorist group and any armed insurgency this nation has ever confronted. We can defeat them if we employ the power of the United States in a true coalition with others around the world. We can defeat this group, but it will take a combination of things. It will take a substantial ground force, to which the primary bulk of it must be made up of local Sunni Arabs, but there will be the necessity to significantly increase the number of U.S. special operators embedded alongside them.
Do you have a number?
Well, I think that's why you ask military officers to design a strategy, a plan, and those plans and those tactics are going to drive the number of people you need to implement it, whatever number it takes. By the way, the president tonight talked cynically, again, as is normally the case with him, about we're not going to have an Iraq-style war again. No one is calling for an invasion of 100,000 American troops. We don't need 100,000 troops from anywhere to defeat ISIS, but it will take a substantial ground army that needs to be made up primarily of Sunni Arabs from the region, but they will need American special operators, a significant increase in air support, and we will have to beef up our intelligence programs. I wish the president tonight would have been honest with the American people. In order to prevent and disrupt these attacks in the future, we are going to need to be able to gather more intelligence, not less intelligence. And as president, he has supported measures and, in fact, implemented measures that have weakened our intelligence gathering capability. Do these things, we will defeat them. It will not be easy. It will take time, but we will defeat them. But it starts by acknowledging to the American people that indeed we are at war, and we are at war with radical Islamic jihadists who are also terrorists, of course, but motivated by their view of Islam. This is a war on radical Islam.
Senator, obviously the president did talk about the terrorist threat evolving, and as we saw in San Bernardino, there may be more incidents where terrorists are inspired but not directed, and we don't know all the details yet, obviously. We asked people to write in on social media. Karen on Twitter wrote in a question for you. What is radicalization, and how would you fight it within America?
Well, radicalization is the notion that an individual doesn't just convert to Islam or becomes active in Islamic faith, but actually becomes active in an interpretation of the Islamic faith that calls on jihad. And in the case of ISIS, it's about the belief that they are an army that's going to trigger an apocalyptic showdown with the West. That's why they have a publication monthly called Dabiq, D-A-B-I-Q. It is a city in Syria that they believe will be the site of a final armed confrontation. These people that are becoming radicalized are being inspired to join the army that's going to win that fight and usher in a global caliphate. And by the way, the threat of a homegrown violent extremist is the most significant and dangerous development in this entire war on terror, because they become undetectable. In essence, you're talking about individuals that were on no database. No one had any reason to be concerned about them, apparently, until the day of this attack. And these are very difficult plots to disrupt. Sometimes they involve family relationships, as in the case of the Boston Marathon, obviously in the case of the attack in California. We need better intelligence gathering capabilities to try to disrupt them, and more importantly, in this particular case, what I'm most interested in is whether they get $30,000 to $40,000, which is what it would have cost at least to assemble the arsenal that they did for the pipe bombs, and because based on what he earned working as a health inspector, no way he paid for this. So they may have been inspired, but someone funded this, and this is a critical development we need to know more about. Senator,
you were completely dismissive of the president's talk about preventing someone on a no-fly list from getting a gun. Obviously, the New York Times, in kind of an unusual move since really the 1920s, put a New York Times editorial on the front page saying recently, it is a moral outrage and a national disgrace that civilians can legally purchase weapons designed specifically to kill people with brutal speed and efficiency. America's elected leaders offer prayers for gun victims and then callously and without fear of consequence reject the most basic restrictions on weapons of mass killing, as they did on Thursday. They distract us with arguments about the word terrorism. The New York Times continuing, let's be clear, these spree killings are all in their own ways acts of terrorism. Your reaction to that?
Well, certainly they're all horrible tragedies, but there's a difference between that. Not that one is worse or better than the other, but in the case of radical Islam, we are battling a ideology that goes much deeper than just a grievance someone has or some domestic issue that may happen or mental illness. In the case of some of these horrible tragedies, these are people that know exactly what they are doing, and they're being motivated by their interpretation of their faith that calls for global jihad, the defeat of all in this case of ISIS, all non-Sunni radicals, and the establishment of a global caliphate. That is what is motivating them to take these attacks. In the case of the no-fly list, the no-fly list is populated with a substantial number of Americans that are nothing close to being terrorists. They're on that list by mistake because they share a name with someone else. And the notion that a radical jihadist who is on the no-fly list is going to walk into a local gun shop to purchase a gun is absurd. And that's not how they're going to purchase weapons or any of the elements they need for a pipe bomb, for that matter. This is nothing but an effort to use this issue of terrorism as another way to try to push their agenda that they've been dying to push for the longest amount of time, and that's gun control. To the